ballroom glittered under the shimmering chandeliers, a kaleidoscope of light reflecting off sequined gowns and polished marble floors. Yet in the midst of this opulent chaos, Ellie Harper found herself squeezed into a shadowed corner, crouched over a roughly sketched floor plan of the mansion. Her paint-splattered clothes, usually a source of embarrassment, now felt strangely like armor against the absurdity swirling around her. So, if Maximilian's accomplices are moving like clockwork and Mrs. Wexley's gossip suggests the East Wing serves as their staging ground, then we have to cut them off before they can regroup, Ellie whispered, her voice barely rising above the hum of the gala. Jasper Quinn, the head of security with a face carved from stone and eyes trained to catch the slightest irregularity, leaned in, his skepticism softened by the urgency in Ellie's tone. "You really think we can pull this off, Mrs. Penelope Wexley, an extravagant spectacle in a gown that seemed to swallow the space around her, fluttered her heavily jeweled hands. "Darling, with a little flair and a touch of drama, we shall indeed." The trio's unlikely alliance was a testament to the chaotic night they had endured. Ellie, once a nervous outsider mistaken for security, had grown into a quick-witted conspirator. Jasper's distrust had slowly morphed into reluctant trust, and Mrs. Wexley's flamboyant curiosity transformed from mere nosiness into a strategic advantage. As the plan took shape, Mrs. Wexley volunteered to mingle among the guests, her sharp tongue and flamboyant presence perfect for gathering whispered secrets and sowing distractions. She swept back into the crowd like a peacock on parade, her laughter ringing out as she spun tales and elicited juicy tidbits. Jasper, ever vigilant, took up his post near the main hallways, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow, while Ellie prepared herself for what might be the most farcical but crucial moments of her life. No sooner had the plan been set in motion than chaos erupted. A clumsy accomplice of Maximilian, evidently unaware of the brewing conspiracy, stumbled into their path. The collision sent Ellie, Jasper, and Mrs. Wexley tumbling over a lavish dessert table. Clairs flew like missiles, champagne glasses shattered with theatrical flair, and gasps of shock rippled through the crowd. Ellie scrambled to her feet, cheeks flushed with mortification, but eyes alight with determination. "Well," she quipped breathlessly, "that's one way to sweeten the evening." Jasper shook his head, trying not to smile, while Mrs. Wexley dusted off her gown, already plotting her next flamboyant maneuver. Retreating to a quiet alcove, the trio caught their breath. Ellie cracked a self-deprecating joke to ease the tension, her nervous energy now tempered by camaraderie. Jasper's guarded trust began to thaw, the lines between duty and friendship blurring. Mrs. Wexley's sharp eyes gleamed with purpose, the socialite's penchant for drama now a weapon wielded with precision. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts, an odd coalition bound by necessity, wit, and a shared desire to outwit the charming yet ruthless Maximilian Crane. "We were getting close," Ellie said quietly, eyes scanning the glittering crowd. "Tonight, the unlikely thief becomes the unlikely hero." As the night deepened and the final act approached, the mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the comedic showdown that would expose secrets, shatter facades, and turn the social order upside down. Ellie adjusted her stance, feeling for the first time that she belonged not to the glittering elite, nor the faceless security, but to the chaotic dance of chance and courage she had embraced. The game was on, and the players were ready to face the absurdity head-on. The grand hall of Archibald Sterling's mansion was a spectacle of opulence and excess, every inch dripping with crystal chandeliers, gilded moldings, and the kind of velvet drapes that seemed to swallow light whole. In the very center of this glittering chaos stood Archibald himself, a man as flamboyant as the surroundings, a living caricature of wealth and self-importance. His silver mane of hair refused any attempt at taming, and his monocle glinted with the reflected sparkle of 1,000 diamonds. "And then I told them," Archibald boomed, his voice carrying with the echo of grandiosity, "if you want loyalty in this world, you must buy it." His arms flailed dramatically, nearly knocking over a waiter balancing a tray of champagne flutes. The guests, a collection of the glitterati and social climbers, exchanged amused smirks and exchanged whispered asides. Ellie Harper, crouched discreetly behind a towering marble pillar, took in the scene with a mix of awe and disbelief. The paint splatters on her plain blouse felt wildly out of place here, but tonight, that was exactly the point. She wasn't just a nervous art student anymore, she was a player in this absurd social theater, and Archibald Sterling was her unwitting ally. Maximilian Crane, the impeccably dressed thief, stood near the grand staircase, his sharp eyes flicking between the host and the distracted security personnel. His network of bumbling accomplices fidgeted nervously nearby, their plan teetering on the brink of collapse. Ellie's heart hammered in her chest as she clutched the stolen pocket watch hidden beneath her sleeve. Every nerve screamed for her to run, but her wry humor and quick thinking kept her grounded. She watched as Archibald launched into another monologue about his lavish yacht and the perils of high society, completely oblivious to the chaos simmering beneath his polished surface. Mrs. Penelope Wexley swept into the room with the drama of a tempest, her extravagant gown trailing behind her like a comet tail. She interrupted Archibald's grand storytelling with a loud, "Darling, have you heard the latest scandal?" instantly drawing the attention of several guests, and, crucially, the security staff. Jasper Quinn, ever vigilant despite the circus around him, caught Ellie's eye and gave a subtle nod. It was the signal she had been waiting for. Moving with a deceptive grace that betrayed her habitual clumsiness, Ellie slipped from her hiding spot, the soft clinking of glasses and laughter masking her footsteps. Maximilian noticed the movement too late. The sly smile on his lips faltered as Ellie deftly weaved through the crowd, the pocket watch safely in her grasp. Her mind raced, piecing together the absurd contradictions of the night, the billionaire's obliviousness, the socialite's meddling, the security chief's skepticism, and her own improbable rise from outsider to heroine. The tension in the room was palpable, yet beneath it all simmered a deliciously ironic comedy. Here was wealth and power, all strutting and preening like peacocks, blind to their own folly. And here was Ellie, a paint-splattered art student, rewriting the script with every step. As Archibald's voice rose into another theatrical crescendo, Ellie prepared for the next move in the game, confident, quick-witted, and ready to turn the tables once and for all. The night was far from over, but for the first time, she felt firmly in control of her own chaotic story. "Ladies and gentlemen," Archibald proclaimed, raising a glass with a flourish, "let us toast to the unpredictable nature of life. May it always keep us on our toes." And with that, Ellie slipped into the shadows, the gleaming pocket watch a silent promise of the showdown to come. The billionaire's blind spot was her greatest weapon yet. The grand ballroom was a glittering sea of silk sequins, and the faint but persistent scent of expensive perfume mixed with the subtle underlying aroma of anxiety, the kind that only surfaces when a priceless family heirloom has just done a Houdini act. Ellie Harper, clutching the stolen pocket watch with a grip that threatened to crush it, darted through the crowd. Her paint-splattered clothes a stark contrast to the tailored gowns and tuxedos around her. She nearly collided with a towering champagne fountain, sending a cascade of golden bubbles spilling onto the polished floor. The tinkling of the falling glasses adding an almost slapstick soundtrack to the mounting chaos. "Stop right there!" A voice boomed, sharp and authoritative. Jasper Quinn, the head of security, was hot on her heels. Ellie's heart thudded painfully in her chest, a wild rhythm that echoed the frantic energy of the room. She wasn't sure if the guests were watching her as a suspect or as a farcical sideshow, but either way, she had to act fast. This was her moment, accidental heroism in the most unlikely of guises. Maximilian Crane, the very picture of arrogance in his tailored suit, stood near the grand staircase, his sly smile faltering as Ellie closed in. His sharp eyes flickered with a mix of anger and calculation, and for a moment, Ellie saw a flicker of something raw beneath the polished surface: desperation. The guests, sensing the mounting drama, began to gather, their murmurs swelling into a low hum of anticipation. The chandeliers above cast dramatic shadows, turning the ballroom into a stage set for a social spectacle of scandal and revelation. "Give it back, Maximilian!" Ellie's voice rang out, surprisingly steady despite the butterflies doing somersaults in her stomach. She held out the pocket watch, wrapped awkwardly in a napkin she'd grabbed from a nearby table. Her clumsiness tripping over the hem of her own dress, nearly colliding with a waiter carrying a tray of whores, Douvres only added to the surreal comedy of the moment. Jasper was at her side in an instant, his stern face softening just a fraction as he witnessed Ellie's boldness. Despite the chaos, his eyes reflected a grudging respect. This nervous, awkward art student was outsmarting a man who had fooled so many. It was an unlikely alliance forged in the fires of crisis, and for the first time, Jasper saw Ellie not as a liability but as a key player in this unfolding drama. Just as Maximilian opened his mouth to retort, Mrs. Penelope Wexley made her entrance into the fray. With a dramatic flair befitting her flamboyant gowns and excessive jewelry, she raised her voice, cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. "Oh, Maximilian, darling, do try to keep your hands to yourself," she exclaimed, her sharp tongue masking a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "Or shall I remind everyone here of that little incident at the yacht party last summer?" The room erupted in gasps and a ripple of laughter. The socialite's scandalous revelation was the final nail in Maximilian's well-polished facade. Maximilian's face paled, his carefully constructed mask cracking under the weight of public scrutiny. The guests' whispers turned to accusations, and with a theatrical sigh, he slumped, defeated. Ellie stood there, paint stains and all, the unlikely heroine whose clumsy antics had turned the tide. The gala, once a symbol of untouchable wealth and rigid social order, was now a playground of exposed secrets and shifting alliances. Ellie's reputation, once teetering on the edge of ruin, was reborn in the glow of unexpected victory. As the crowd slowly dispersed, still buzzing with gossip and amusement, Ellie allowed herself a small, wry smile. Tonight wasn't just about survival, it was about finding her place in a world that, though absurd and chaotic, had suddenly become a little more hers. And as the last notes of the string quartet drifted through the air, Ellie couldn't help but wonder what other mischief, and maybe even inspiration, awaited her just beyond the glittering doors of the mansion. The ballroom was still humming with scattered conversations when Jasper approached Ellie, a rare smile breaking through his usually stern demeanor. "Not bad for a paint-spattered art student," he said, nodding appreciatively. Ellie chuckled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Well, you know what they say, art imitates life. And sometimes life imitates a slapstick comedy." Their laughter mingled with the fading music, a warm counterpoint to the night's earlier tension. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Ellie knew this was only the beginning of her unexpected journey. But for now, she would savor the moment, the sweet taste of vindication, and the peculiar thrill of having truly stolen the show. The unlikely thief had become the unlikely hero, and the night was far from over. The grand ballroom, once a temple of glittering elegance and hushed whispers, transformed swiftly into a theater of uproarious chaos. Maximilian Crane, the picture of suave arrogance just moments before, now stood unmasked literally. After a well-timed slip of a mask from one of his own bumbling accomplices, revealing a face slick with surprise, anger, and a flash of genuine vulnerability. The murmurs swelled into a cacophony as crystal chandeliers cast fractured light over the scene, catching in the shocked eyes of the guests. Their gasps echoed off the marble pillars as the reality of the night's farce settled like a thick fog. Ellie Harper, standing somewhat awkwardly near the edge of the ballroom, felt the weight of all eyes slide over her paint-splattered clothes and frayed nerves. The plain canvas of her appearance was a stark contrast to the extravagant gowns, tailored suits, and glittering jewels that swirled around her. Yet it was her nervous, clumsy presence that had inadvertently saved the day, turning the night on its head. She could almost hear her own thoughts snarkily narrate the absurdity of it all: a broke art student, mistaken for security, stealing a thief's prize, and suddenly the unlikely heroine of a billionaire's gala. She swallowed hard, half embarrassed, half amused. Mrs. Penelope Wexley was already in full form, her flamboyant gown sweeping dramatically as she pirouetted through the crowd, her sharp tongue slicing through the tension like a glittering dagger. "Well, darlings," she trilled, fanning herself with a jewel-encrusted fan, "it seems the real show tonight was not the art, but the artifice." Her voice carried, drawing reluctant smiles and even a few stifled laughs from guests caught in the absurd spectacle. Mrs. Wexley's knack for turning gossip into a weapon of social commentary was perhaps the only thing as sharp as the diamond necklace swinging around her neck. Jasper Quinn, the head of security who had spent much of the evening casting suspicious glances Ellie's way, now stood beside her, his posture less rigid, his eyes less guarded. A glance exchanged between them was all it took to acknowledge a shared, unspoken relief. The tension that had coiled tightly around the gala like a serpent began to unravel, replaced by a cautious optimism. The clinking of glasses resumed, footsteps echoed on polished marble, and the social machine, though rattled, started its slow, awkward grind forward. Meanwhile, the host himself, Mr. Archibald Sterling, seemed remarkably oblivious to the chaos erupting around him. Draped in an overly ornate tuxedo that looked more like a costume than formal wear, he smiled vacantly, more interested in the sparkle of the chandeliers than the downfall of his would-be usurper. His eccentricity was a constant reminder of how the world of wealth thrived on appearances, often ignoring the messy realities beneath. Ellie finally found a quiet corner away from the swirling storm of gossip and spectacle. The soft glow of the chandeliers caught the paint splatters on her sleeves, turning them into a badge of honor rather than a mark of shame. Her thoughts drifted, sharp and wry, weaving through the night's absurd events. The social theater had been dazzling and ridiculous, in equal measure a fragile dance of power, status, and pretense that could topple with a single misplaced word or a stolen watch. She mused on the fluidity of identity, how she had moved from nervous outsider to accidental hero with nothing but a mixture of luck, quick thinking, and a healthy dose of clumsiness. The thin line between heroism and folly had never seemed thinner nor more amusing. This night, she realized, was not just a story to tell but a lesson carved in laughter and chaos. A mirror held up to the absurdity of class and the price of appearances. As the guests began to disperse, the murmurs of scandal and speculation softened into the night air. Ellie's heart still fluttered with a cocktail of relief and exhilaration. Whatever came next, she knew she had stepped beyond her modest beginnings into a world that was as bewildering as it was hilarious, and she was ready to face it, paint-stained sleeves and all. With a final glance back at the glittering ballroom, Ellie allowed herself a small, wry smile. The gala was over, but her story, her unlikely adventure, was just beginning. And if life was going to be a canvas, she was determined to paint it with all the colors of chaos and comedy she could muster. The night had been a riotous masquerade of mistaken identities, slapstick mischief, and sharp social satire. But beneath the laughter and the farce lay a truth Ellie could no longer ignore. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments reveal the strongest parts of ourselves. And sometimes, the unlikely thief becomes the unexpected hero. As the last guests trickled out, the mansion settling into an eerie quiet, Ellie felt a strange sense of belonging. Not to the glittering world of billionaires and socialites, but to the unpredictable, messy, and gloriously imperfect world of being herself. And with that thought, she stepped out into the dawn, ready for whatever mischief life would throw her way next. The gala, which only moments before teetered on the brink of utter chaos, began to settle into an odd rhythm of whispered excitement and subdued laughter. Ellie Harper, standing somewhat awkwardly in the middle of the grand ballroom, felt the weight of 100 eyes on her eyes that were no longer suspicious but curious, admiring even. Her paint-splattered dress, once a mark of clumsy misfortune, now seemed to shimmer in the prismatic light cast by the towering chandeliers overhead. Clinking glasses punctuated the murmur of gossip that fluttered like a mischievous breeze among the guests. "My dear Ellie," came a voice as flamboyant as the cascading jewels adorning its owner. "Mrs. Penelope Wexley swept toward her, a dazzling comet streaking through the crowd, her eyes twinkling with unspoken schemes. "You have caused quite the stir tonight. Who knew that a humble art student could steal not just a pocket watch but the entire show?" She leaned in conspiratorially, the scent of lavender and expensive perfume enveloping Ellie. "You've got the kind of social capital some of us have spent lifetimes trying to acquire." Ellie blinked, taken aback by the socialite's audacious praise. The absurdity of it all being celebrated for what felt like a series of blunders was almost too much to take in. Yet beneath the fluttering nerves, a spark of pride began to kindle. From across the room, Jasper Quinn observed the scene with a rare softness in his usually stern gaze. The head of security, who had spent most of the evening casting suspicious glances her way, now offered a nod of approval. It was subtle, but to Ellie it felt like a badge of honor. The low hum of the string quartet swelled, lending a cinematic grandeur to the moment. Even Miver. Archibald Sterling, the eccentric billionaire whose obsession with appearances had shaped the entire evening, raised a glass toward her. His smile was broad but distracted, as if the spectacle unfolding was just another curious event in his kaleidoscopic world. The glittering lights caught on the crystals of the chandeliers, casting rainbows that seemed to spotlight Ellie, the unlikely heroine of the night. As the guests whispered and speculated, Ellie found herself weaving through the crowd, a reluctant celebrity in her own right. The paradox was deliciously clear. The very scandal that could have ruined her had instead vaulted her into a strange new realm of social acceptance. The same elite who might have dismissed her as an outsider were now eager to bask in her reflected glow, captivated by her audacity and quick wit. Mrs. Wexley's laughter rang out, a bright, ringing sound that seemed to break the tension like a champagne cork popping. "Darling, if you ever tire of art, you could always take up politics or even social climbing. You've got the flair!" Ellie chuckled, the sound surprising even herself. Jasper fell into step beside her, the two forming an unlikely pair amid the glitter and grandeur. "Not bad for someone who was just trying to blend in," he remarked, his voice low but genuine. "I've learned that blending in is overrated," Ellie replied, her eyes scanning the room with a newfound confidence. "Sometimes you have to make a splash even if it's a messy one." The night wound down with a heady mix of triumph and irony. Ellie's paint-splattered clothes, once a source of embarrassment, were now a badge of honor, proof that she had not only survived, but thrived in a world that often seemed designed to exclude her. The line between heroism and folly had blurred, leaving behind a story richer than any canvas she had ever painted. As the last guests began to depart, Ellie caught a glimpse of her reflection in a gilded mirror. The face staring back at her was the same nervous art student who had arrived hours ago, yet something had changed. There was a spark of mischief, a glint of courage, and an unmistakable air of someone ready to face whatever chaos life might throw next. And with that, the unlikely thief-turned-heroine took her first step into a future where the absurd and the extraordinary danced hand in hand, her story far from over. The gala's tumultuous crescendo had finally given way to a rare and welcome lull. The once bustling mansion, now emptied of its glittering guests, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Ellie found herself lingering near the grand entrance, paint splattered and awkward as ever, but with a new weight lifted from her shoulders. Jasper Quinn, the ever-watchful head of security, stood a few paces away, his usually stern countenance softened by the night's end. Jasper began, his voice low and rough with exhaustion. I didn't think you had it in you tonight. Ellie blinked, caught off guard. You mean surviving without tripping over your own feet? He cracked a rare, dry smile. More like outsmarting a thief and managing to keep your head when half the room was ready to throw you out on your ear. He gestured broadly to the empty hallway, the chandeliers casting long shadows that danced like ghosts of the evening's chaos. She chuckled, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. I guess sometimes being clumsy isn't such a bad thing. Jasper's eyes softened. You were more than clumsy. You were sharp, quick on your feet, even if your balance said otherwise. The words, simple yet sincere, settled warmly within Ellie's chest. It was the first time all night she'd felt seen not as the awkward, paint-stained outsider, but as someone who mattered. Come on, Jasper said, motioning toward the balcony. Let's get some fresh air. The mansion's too stuffy now. On the balcony, the last golden rays of sunset bathed the garden in a gentle glow. The manicured hedges stretched out in neat rows, their shadows weaving intricate patterns on the cobblestone path below. The distant hum of the city blended with the soft rustle of leaves, creating a symphony of calm that contrasted sharply with the evening's earlier frenzy. Ellie leaned against the railing, exhaling deeply. It's hard to believe all that happened here tonight, she murmured. Jasper nodded. High society has a funny way of pretending everything's perfect when it's anything but. The words resonated with Ellie. She thought about the absurd rituals, the whispered gossip, and the thin veneer of civility that masked a world obsessed with appearances. Yet, here with Jasper, the walls felt less daunting. Ellie said, fishing in her bag, I brought this with me. She pulled out a crumpled sketch, edges smudged with paint. The rough strokes captured the gala's chaos, the frantic chase, the flamboyant guests, even the elusive thief slipping through the crowd. She handed it to Jasper, who took it carefully, his brow furrowing as he examined the raw honesty in the lines. You have a good eye, he said thoughtfully. You see through the nonsense. That's rare. Ellie smiled, a flicker of pride warming her cheeks. Maybe that's the only way to survive nights like this. A comfortable silence settled between them. The city lights began to twinkle beyond the garden, each a tiny beacon against the encroaching darkness. So, what now? Ellie asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and a hint of hope. Jasper looked out over the horizon, then back at her. I think we make sure this isn't the last time we work together. She raised an eyebrow. You want to keep hanging out with a clumsy art student who accidentally steals from thieves. He smirked. Clumsy or not, you've got guts. That's worth more than any fancy suit. Laughter bubbled between them, genuine and unforced. In that moment, the chasm between their worlds seemed to narrow, replaced by the promise of an unexpected alliance. As the last guests trickled out and the mansion's grand doors closed behind them, Ellie felt a strange sense of belonging. The night had tested her in ways she never imagined, but it had also given her something priceless, friendship forged in the fires of chaos. Looking up at the stars, Ellie whispered to herself, maybe the real masterpiece is the story I'm living. And with that, she stepped forward ready for whatever mischief, madness, and laughter lay ahead.